So, on behalf of Defense Colony Welfare Association and Gracious Living Foundation, I welcome everybody who is present here, all our members, and I also welcome our heartiest welcome to Dr. Sanjaya Baru and Ms Maya Mirchandani. Thank you so much for gracing the occasion. I request now our ex-president, Shri S.P. Raval, to welcome our esteemed guest. Ravalji,
Good morning, everybody. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Sanjaya Baru and Maya Mirchandani. Dr. Sanjaya Baru, a multifaceted personality, is one of India's most respected and influential commentator on political and economic issues. He has been the Associated Editor, Economics Times and Times of India, Chief Editor, Business Standard, Professor at the Indian Council of Research and International Economic Relations, member of India's National Security Advisory Board in Prime Minister's Office. He has taught at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore. He has been a consultant at the Human Development Report Office, UNDP, and Asian Development Bank. He has also lectured in Shandong House in London, National Defense College in Delhi, and Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. 2017, Dr. Basu was appointed as the Secretary General FICCI. He was also the Additional Independent Director at Artemis Global Life Sciences Limited and Wockhardt Limited. Dr. Baru was selected by the Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, whom he served as media advisor and chief spokesperson between 2004 to 2008. He is the author of The Political Economy of Indian Sugar 1990, Strategic Consequences of India Economic Performance 2007, and The Accidental Prime Minister 2014, which was made into movie and well received all over. He has also published extensively on economic and strategic policy in India and abroad. Thank you, Dr. Baru, giving us this opportunity. Now, I take this opportunity to introduce Ms. Maya Mirchandani. She's an award-winning Indian journalist who now heads the Department of Media Studies at India's premier liberal arts institution, Ashoka University. She focuses on principles and practices of conflict journalism in an environment where free speech, debate, dissent are increasingly challenged, condemned, or silenced. Maya moved to research and teaching after over 2 decades as senior editor, Foreign Affairs with NDTV, India's pioneer private news network. Maya is also currently a senior fellow at Delhi-based Observer Research Foundation. She hosts a regular video blog called Wide Angle with Maya Mirchandani for thewire.in, which focuses on national security, human rights, and foreign affairs. Maya has won the prestigious Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism twice, the Red Ink Award for Reporting on Human Rights, as well as the Exchange for Media Broadcast Journalism Award for Best International Affair Reporting. For Maya, the doors of reporting have not always opened peacefully. She survived a suicide bomb attack at the President Chandrika Kumaratunga's election rally in 1999, reported on 9/11 as the plane hit the World Trade Center in New York, and survived pro-government mob attacking the media during the anti-Mubarak protests in Cairo, Egypt. This makes Maya like a Rani ki Jhansi of journalism. From Moscow to Washington DC, Cairo to Islamabad, Freetown, Sierra Leone to Rangoon, and several places in between, Maya has traveled extensively, always in search of good story to tell. Thank you, Maya, accepting our invitation and be kind enough to interview Dr. Sanjaya Baru. Over to you, Maya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raval, and thank you all to this wonderful organization for putting this reading together. I think Dr. Baru will agree with me that this is quite so quite different from most of the book events that we actually have been participating at and discussing your book at. It's an unusual audience, and I dare say it's going to be a really sharp audience that's going to put you on the spot. I'm very happy to allow them the freedom to do that. Just a few ground rules before we start the discussion. We'll go for about an hour, so around noon, a little after noon. And if you all have questions, could you please just put them in the chat box? I'll pick them up from there, and I'll ask the questions on your behalf, unless somebody wants to speak themselves, in which case I'd request you to keep your questions or comments brief so that we can get as many as we can in. We'll sort of maybe do a discussion for about 20-25 minutes and then open up the floor to the audience. So Dr. Baru, thank you very much for being a part of this Saturday morning book discussion on India's Power Elite. The flags are still there from the last time we spoke about this book. But for the audience here, I just want to sort of give you a broad sweep of the book, if I may. You can, of course, elaborate on that, which is the hypothesis that Dr. Baru is making is that there is possibly a new power elite in India today, which is different from the Lutyens elite that we have been sort of used to pillaring over the last few years. But are they also sort of interchangeable with this new? I mean, who are the people who are sort of making up this power elite? What are the interactions between class, between caste, between different geographies when it comes to the creation of this power elite? Is it money? Is it education? Is it political backing that is leading to the creation of a group that has perhaps a disproportionate influence on the corridors of power? With that very broad introduction, if I may, Dr. Baru, let me just hand over to you and ask you to just elaborate for this audience what your intention was behind this book, behind writing this book, how you are defining for a lay audience what this power elite is, and frankly, why is there the need to identify a group like this?
Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you very much, Rachna and Mr. Jasbir Singh and members of the Defence Colony Club. Thank you for inviting me again. I remember being with all of you in person a few years ago when you invited me to speak about an earlier book of mine. And therefore, I'm delighted to be back, though virtually. And I am actually right now in Hyderabad, and you're all in Delhi. But it's all nice to be together. Well, to come to this question straight away, first of all, this is a book that's been in my mind for a long time. As I say in the very introduction to this book, through my student days, I grew up looking at issues pertaining to class and caste in India. As a student of economics, as a student of politics, I found that a lot of the Western literature, which looks at society, which looks at power, I mean, we have classics, for example, like Bertrand Russell's book on power, Gramsci's work on power, Max Weber and the Pareto and a lot of Italian scholars, all of whom I have actually mentioned in my introductory chapters. But what distinguishes India from a lot of this Western literature on power is the role of caste, and that kind of sets the Indian power system aside from the power systems that we see in a lot of the literature. So for a long time, I've been wanting to write a book like this, looking at power. The two milestones, if you like, in my life that made me write this book was first the fact that I read a book by C. Wright Mills, an American sociologist who wrote in the 1950s on the American power elite. It's a book that left a huge impression on me, and it's a book that I've reread over the years. And when I read it first time and when I reread it again a few years ago, I was tempted to look at India through that prism. The second, of course, factor that influenced me was my own transition. I come from the city of Hyderabad, and when I moved to Delhi in 1990 from academia into journalism, it just so happened that that was the year in which Narasimha Rao became Prime Minister, another Hyderabadi coming to power in Delhi. And I got a ringside view of what was happening in Delhi very quickly. I wrote almost on a daily basis. I used to be with the Economic Times and then the Times of India in the early 90s from 90 to 96, 97. And really got a ringside view of the way New Delhi works. And over the years, I've had the opportunity of getting to know the way power works in India. Being a business journalist, I looked at Indian business. Having worked in the Prime Minister's office, I was looking at the way politics works. So, it's a kind of natural book for me to write, given this background, given my background in the media, in academia, and in government, and my interest in politics. Finally, the point, of course, is that no one else has attempted something like this. We have some sociologists looking at caste, looking at class, looking at politics, kind of independently of each other, but nobody's stitching it all together. And certainly, very few of our political scientists have looked at business and the role of the interaction between business and politics. And one of the central arguments of my book is that to understand this relationship between what I call wealth and power is central to understanding the nature of the elite in India. As I argue in my book, the wealthy have become the powerful and the powerful have become wealthy. I call India a plutocracy, increasingly a plutocracy. The composition of parliament has changed over the last 70, 75 years. More and more of our members of parliament are increasingly millionaires and billionaires. Wealth has become important for getting even elected. The cost of elections has gone up. So this synergy, this in a coalescence, if you like, this coming together of power and wealth is a phenomenon that stares us in our face, that requires us to understand the nature of power, the nature of politics in India. The third point I'd make as an introductory remark is that I was captivated a few years ago when I read Ram Manohar Lohia, someone who does not get adequate attention in Indian public discussions today, but was a very influential political theorist of the Nehruvian era of 1950s. And Lohia inspired, the socialist movement, people like Mulayam Singh Yadav, Lalu Yadav, the whole socialist movement in India was inspired by Lohia. And Lohia was the first person who tried to actually define the Indian power elite. When he wrote in an essay saying that the power elite of India have three qualifications, or three identities. One, they have inherited wealth. Two, they are upper caste. And three, they are English speaking. And I think that was a very apt way of describing the Nehruvian elite. They were certainly upper caste, they were certainly English speaking, and most of them had inherited wealth, almost all of them. In fact, if you look at Indian business in the 50s, 60s, they're all basically inherited wealth, and of course, landed wealth was very important even in politics. That has changed, and that is the starting point of my book, which is to say that we have seen over the last 10, 20 years, certainly since 1991, each of these elements changing. First, the wealthy are no longer simply those with inherited wealth. We now have a lot of first generation wealthy across the spectrum. And in fact, now we are getting more and more the new billionaires in the services economy, the unicorns that people write about in the startup economy. So you have a lot of new wealthy, first generation wealthy. Secondly, upper caste is no longer a passport to power. In fact, if anything, the middle class have become politically more powerful across the country. And fascinating thing today in Indian politics is how the BJP, which was essentially a Brahmin-dominated party, even as recently as 2014, when Narendra Modi's first cabinet had Arun Jaitley Brahmin, Sushma Swaraj Brahmin, Manohar Parrikar Brahmin, Nitin Gadkari, important member Brahmin, Prakash Javadekar Brahmin, and all five no longer exist. Arun Jaitley, Sushma Swaraj, and Manohar Parrikar have passed away. Anant Kumar, sorry, sixth one, all four have passed away. And Nitin Gadkari has been demoted and Prakash Javadekar has been dumped. So in a sense, the BJP itself, which was a kind of upper caste, Brahmin dominated party, now has a lot of middle caste, backward caste. And recently, in fact, when Modi reshuffled his cabinet and put out a public statement about the composition of his cabinet, they officially identified ministers by their caste. This is unprecedented. And now we read in the papers how in the UP, for example, the whole focus is on getting the Yadav vote, the Dalit vote. So even the BJP, which is for a long time being a more upper caste dominated party than most others, is moving to the middle caste. And finally, English speaking. I mean, English speaking elite are no longer that important in politics. In business world, of course, they are. In the academic world, they are. But in the political world, at the state level, the transition took place long, long back. Almost every state government today functions in its vernacular. I don't think there's any state government except maybe in the Northeast that actually functions in the English language. The government of India increasingly functions in Hindi, and therefore politically also the importance of English is going down. So there is a fundamental change from what Ram Manohar Lohia in the 50s described as the power elite. Now, just to end my initial comments, Maya, I think I should also make the point that, since you talked about the Lutyens elite, that my discussion of the Lutyens elite becomes, in a sense, the starting point of the book, because that is brought into focus. I mean, the first prime minister who sharply focused on this transition, on the cleavage, was Modi. I mean, even Vajpayee did not make much of the fact that, he functioned with an elite that he inherited. And certainly during the period of Manmohan Singh's tenure, this was the so-called Lutyens elite was very much in power. I think Modi came to power as an outsider. He made much of the fact, for example, that on the day he entered Indian Parliament as Prime Minister of India, he was entering it for the first time in his life. He had never even physically entered the Parliament building until he became Prime Minister. So, he was making much of the fact that he was a complete outsider, entering this citadel of power as an outsider. And he decided to target what he called the Lutyens elite, the Khan Market gang, as a way of focusing on this shift. And so I begin my book with that, but the rest of the book is really looking at the nature of the transition, the role of the feudal elite, the declining importance of the feudal elite, the shifts in the business class, the shifts in the academic and kind of cultural media leadership. And that's what the book is about.
Right. Thanks a lot for that, Dr. Baru. And we've sort of talked about this before. And one aspect of the elite that you also touch upon quite extensively is the media as an influential, opinion-making elite. We'll get to that in a minute. But just to pick up on what you talked about just now in terms of the Nehruvian elite that Lohia talked about and the subsequent caste-based distinctions that arose in Indian politics as a result of an upper caste elite, and now this attempt by the current avatar of the BJP to bring it all together and unite it, not as upper caste, but perhaps as class, perhaps as religion. I mean, there are different mechanisms at play right now which serve the political end game and the end goal without necessarily focusing on the caste aspect of the elite. So if you have wealth, you can overcome the caste barrier to being a part of this elite. If you are a Hindu, you can overcome the caste barrier to being a part of this elite. We've seen that in UP politics, for example. Tell us what you think about that. The fact that they're trying to find ways to unite people on the basis of a cultural paradigm, whether it's language, whether it is religion, whether it is just a cultural aesthetic, frankly.
Well, the way I look at what is happening today with the BJP is that they're seeking to appropriate all the platforms of, across the political spectrum. They are appropriating, for example, the Mandal platform, as it used to be called, of the Lohiite parties, Mulayam Singh, Lalu. These were all the Mandal parties that came to power in the 1980s as the voice of the middle class. So the BJP, as I said earlier, which was an upper caste party, has itself become a middle caste party by appropriating that platform. They are going, for example, into UP saying we are the party of the Yadavs, we are the party of the Dalits. Second, they're appropriating the left's class platform by talking about class, inequalities and focusing on the rich peasantry versus the landless labor, etc. This is the attempt. How to what extent they will succeed, we'll have to wait and watch. But certainly their attempt is to appropriate the platform of every opposition political party and become, in a sense, like the Congress was in the 1950s and 60s, which is a kind of an umbrella party representing everybody. But underlying this political project, and this is very much a political project because Narendra Modi and the BJP are in the business of coming to power and remaining in power. That is something one must always remember, even as one looks at the larger cultural project, as you put it, of the RSS and of Hindutva. That is a long-term project. The short-term project is to win every election in every state assembly, in every panchayat, and in parliament. So there are two different projects. One is a political project, the other is a cultural project. And the BJP so far has been able to, put something on the back burner, something on the front burner, keep shifting its focus so that it succeeds politically even as it pursues a larger agenda. Now, here I think the most important development, which I keep referring to, is the fact that the BJP has taken Hindutva away from the Brahmins to the backward castes. One of the accusations of the Dalits and the social classes at the lower end of the pyramid in the past used to be that the BJP is a party of Banyas and Brahmins. That is how the BJP used to be described. A Brahmin Banya ki party. And the BJP is moving away from that image to becoming a party of the middle caste and converting the middle caste to its Hindutva ideology. So, in fact, the most aggressive elements of Hindutva today, you see, for example, in lynching mobs, when people are suspected to carrying beef or eating beef. Or you see, for example, in the Ganesh Utsav processions across the country. Or in the Kanvaria or whatever it's called,
Kavadiyas, right.
Kavadiyas, sorry. All of these religious elements are focused on the middle class. And in sheer naked power terms, that is, who matters in the government of India today? The middle class are the dominant elements. So I think the pursuit of a cultural project is a long-term one, but the immediate pursuit of political power is a short-term one, and one should make a distinction between the two.
So just to sort of push that point further, the one distinction between the political messaging around the elites of today versus what would have been even a decade ago is the elimination of patronage, right? So if you're talking about this middle caste upsurge, almost, they're positioning it almost as a subaltern kind of response to decades of patronage by a ruling English-speaking upper caste, Oxbridge educated Nehruvian elite. So do you think that, because we're a country of 130 crore people, right? There are going to be enough people to fill out these ranks and fill up the spaces, a larger elite that's being created because they're reaching out to a larger audience. In that, just to dwell on the cultural aspect of it, because you make references also to Mao's China and the Cultural Revolution over there, and the aftermath of the Cultural Revolution. Are we really thinking beyond the short term or the medium term on what kind of an impact there would be of a cultural revolution that is eliminating the lines of patronage, in its intention to eliminate the lines of patronage, is creating a new elite without perhaps the tools that it would require to continue being an elite apart from wealth and political power?
Well, I think it's a very, very important question. And that is what we are seeing happening. For example, the reason I even allude to the term cultural revolution and refer to the Chinese experience is because the cultural revolution in China was seen essentially as an anti-intellectual and anti-elite movement. That is exactly what it was. I mean, Mao gave the slogan "Bombard the headquarters," where he was asking the party cadre to come and get rid of all the mandarins in Beijing, all the professors in universities, all the important political functionaries were sent out of Beijing into the villages to go and become farmers and workers. So it was a very anti-intellectual, anti-elite movement, which set China back. I mean, the amazing thing about China is how it has bounced back from that. But it certainly set China back by, people say, over a decade or more than that. And that is my concern today, that are we setting India back in the pursuit of anti-elitism? Because at the end of the day, much of the investment, whether in the fields of education, science and technology, knowledge economy, as we call it, has been through English. And therefore the English-speaking elite remain important to the foundations of the knowledge economy. And in challenging them, are we weakening the intellectual foundations of our society? This is a big concern, and that is why I've added a chapter in my book at the very end called "Secession of the Successful," because one of the things that distinguishes India from many of the early communist countries is the fact that the elite are going away. I mean, if you look at Russia or China after the revolution, it's the wealthy from the previous regime that left the country. But in India, the beneficiaries of 70 years of development are leaving this country. The number of Indians leaving the country is going up. The number of students going out of the country is going up. I give all those numbers. The number of businessmen going out of the country is going up. Last year's data shows investment out of India by Indian companies is more than the investment coming into India by foreign companies. So, net FDI is actually negative for the country. So this exit that is happening, perhaps as a consequence of uncertainty at home about the future, about the attacks on the English-speaking elite, is going to cost us. Now, if that is replaced by a more grounded but equally talented Indian, indigenous elite, there's no problem, which is what China finally succeeded in doing. But I'm not yet convinced that that is the direction in which we are going. And therefore, I think the transition we see is likely to weaken us in the same manner in which the transition in China during the Cultural Revolution weakened China.
Right. I mean, so clearly language is sort of a pivot around which the elite turns. I mean, in principle, I think you would find somebody hard pressed to make the argument that the elite should actually take a step back and allow other classes of society to kind of rise up and grow. I mean, I don't think there's an argument to be made as far as that is concerned. But the distinction from what I understand you're making is you can't chuck out an elite entirely unless you're creating a new one, and you're doing it pretty quickly as well, because you need to fill that gap by a group of people who can actually take over the reins. So it's the old elite versus the new elite, and the tools with which that new elite may or may not be in a position to influence change. Now, in this, I mean, if I may make a few distinctions about what these elites are and where ideologically on the spectrum that they may be. I mean, right off the bat, it would be secular versus versus religious. It would be socialist versus capitalist. It would be English speaking versus the vernacular. And I think very importantly, you sort of prefaced your remarks by talking about provincial versus the national. So if we are segregating the kind of tensions between different kinds of elite, how would you prioritize these? Which would come first?
Interesting. Well, I think really what I would prioritize is provincial versus national, which because in India it becomes Hindi versus non-Hindi, and that is very important. You see, the secular versus communal is a very difficult distinction to make when many of the opposition political parties, are not that secular compared to the BJP in terms of the actual functioning. There's a change in even the language of politics in many political parties, particularly the regional parties. I mean, I don't think, for example, since I'm now sitting in Hyderabad, the Telangana Rashtra Samiti (TRS) is any more secular than the BJP. So it's very difficult to classify given the kind of politics all the political parties pursue, because at the end of the day, everybody has fallen into this BJP argument that you need to get the votes of the majority community, and therefore you need to keep the majority community happy. So it's a purely political argument which has a communal dimension, but it's a political argument. The distinction which is actually significant in Indian politics, and if you actually today see what is happening in terms of the mobilization of the opposition. I mean, yesterday there was this big meeting with Sonia Gandhi and many opposition political parties. There was one earlier in the month, and all these meetings happen. You find that you have the BJP, which is essentially today a party of the Hindi region, with a little presence in Karnataka, which was acquired through devious means, a little presence in Assam, but essentially a Hindi regional party, versus DMK in Tamil Nadu, the communists in Kerala, the Jagan in Andhra, TRS in Telangana, Shiv Sena and Pawar in Maharashtra, all these non-Hindi states. And if you look at the mirror image of this in the world of business, that is the transition which I discuss in my chapter on business. That in the pre-liberalization era, from 1940s, in fact even before independence, till the 1980s, if you take the top 100 businesses of the country, they were mostly Marwadi businesses. Except for the Tatas, one Parsi company, otherwise everybody was a Goenka or a Birla or a Singhania or Shriram, essentially Punjabi, Marwadi, Gujarati, Rajasthani businesses. But after 91, you have a change. You have, the whole IT crowd coming from southern India. You have GMR and GDK and Venu Srinivasan and Shiv Nadar and, of course, Mittal from Punjab. So there is a regional business elite coming up. And in many ways, in fact, Modi represented the Gujarati business elite till he decided to move to Varanasi and occupy the Hindi space and become a kind of a leader of the Hindi world, because that's naturally is a route to power for the BJP. So this regional versus national, where earlier the national was the Congress, and now the national is BJP. And earlier the regional was, I talk about this in my book. You go back to the 60s. You had Indira Gandhi, all powerful in Delhi, but you had Anna Durai in Tamil Nadu, EMS Namboodiripad in Kerala, Brahmananda Reddy in Andhra, VP Nayak in Maharashtra, Jyoti Basu and Atulya Ghosh in Bengal, again regional, opposition to Indira, right? So just as Indira dominated Delhi through her control of the north, and opposition to Indira came from the non-Hindi region. Similarly, today I see Modi dominating Delhi with his control of the Hindi region, and the opposition coming from the non-Hindi regional. So, that is the contradiction in my mind, which is today most pregnant with possibilities. Mamata Banerjee in Bengal emerging as a national leader. I think that is pregnant with more possibilities than this communal versus secular argument, because everybody is playing the same game of seeking the majority community vote.
No, I mean, clearly, I think for Prime Minister Modi, he's sort of drawn a very straight line between him and, the elimination of the old elite. I mean, he represents the OBCs, he represents the possibility, but his politics is also an unusual, sometimes even strange mix of socialist welfare policies, appealing to business and seeming pro-business, but also talking about sort of the proletariat in a manner of speaking. So there's a contradiction, I mean, from the perspective of pure political science and political theory, there seems to be no sort of box in which you can fit Prime Minister Modi's political ideology. Is he a communist? Is he a socialist? Is he a capitalist? Is he a Marxist? We don't know what he is. And so when the leader of the country is this sort of person of ideological contradictions or political contradictions, at least in the political sense, not the cultural sense, what is the message that's going down to the elites, and who would these elites be then?
You see, this runs parallel to what we saw during Nehru's time, which is Nehru was also all things to all people. And a very, very distinguished political scientist, Rajni Kothari, coined a phrase to describe the politics of that period, where he said, this is a Congress system. The Congress system was exactly this, which is, it was a party that represented everybody. And it's an umbrella political formation. And that is what changed in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And in a sense, Modi is trying to mimic that process by which he becomes the leader of everybody.
Yeah.
And this kind of umbrella identity for his own leadership. And whether he succeeds or not will depend critically on how the message goes down. If the message going down is that here is a leader who believes in Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which was his original slogan, then he will have a longer tenure, which is exactly what happened with Nehru. Because Nehru was able to convince people that he represented everybody. Right? He was not just a Brahmin from UP, but he was a national leader. He succeeded in convincing the upper caste, the middle caste, the lower caste, the Muslims, the Christians, the Sikhs, everybody, that he was their leader. Now, if actually Modi succeeds in that endeavor, he will be around for a long time. But the contradiction for the BJP is that, to go back to your metaphor, the cultural project versus the political project, there's an essential contradiction between the two. Because the cultural project is one that excludes people.
Yeah.
And the political project is one which wants to include people. And how do you manage this contradiction? We'll have to wait and watch.
Right. Before I open it up to questions, I'm going to ask you the final question. I'd saved it for the last, which is on the role of the media and, how Prime Minister Modi himself sees the role of the media, how the media has been part of the elites right through, I mean, even before independence, I would say, because there was a strong component of the influence the media had even on the freedom movement and on public support and things like that. So, I mean, we've seen the media play that role historically, to the point where Nehru was the first prime minister who tried to put controls on the media as well. But the media is not just about the news. It's not just about journalism. I mean, that's one aspect of it and a key aspect of it, which influences public opinion. But if someone were to ask me, what were the most effective tools of the Hindutva project that have kind of fueled the cultural revolution, I would actually say it was the Sunday morning Ramayana and Mahabharata when I was growing up. Because before that, I mean, we had Nehru's Discovery of India on Doordarshan, and it was this, warm and fuzzy, feel good, all encompassing civilization. But then, you had the Amar Chitra Kathas that made storytelling and mythology, entertaining. And then you used those stories, cultural idioms, and you put them on mainstream mass media. And you suddenly had a ripe, young Indian who was, completely open to influences and messaging, which has perhaps contributed to the kind of support that the cultural project has today.
Yeah,
And this is aside from the journalistic media. I mean, you can comment on that too, but I'm just asking you your views on this.
yeah, well, this is a complex subject, and I have actually not discussed this in my book. But if you look at over a period of time, there is quite naturally a greater awareness of our history, which is good because a lot of the history we were taught in the past was very stilted. I mean, for example, in the history that I learned in school, there was hardly anything about southern India.
Yeah.
All the great kings were from the north, whether it was an Akbar or an Ashoka, the Mughals or the Mauryans. What about the Cholas and the Kakatiyas? So it was North Indian history that was passed off as Indian history, and I think there is now greater, willingness to look at Indian history in a more holistic way, which is all very good. I think there's greater attention being given to the past, which I completely endorse. But I think the point really is that, and my friend Pawan Verma has been writing a lot, even Shashi Tharoor has written on this. If you read people like Pawan and Shashi and even Rajiv Bhargava, the political scientists, they're all drawing attention to the plurality of Hindu society, the pluralism of Hinduism. I mean, Hinduism is the only language that allows an atheist to be part of it. Hinduism is the only religion that allows atheists to be part of it. You can be an atheist and still be a Hindu. That's allowed. You are not declared a kafir for having said, I don't believe in God. You can still say, I don't believe in God and be a Hindu. That is the kind of sagacity, the elasticity of Hinduism that has made it survive. We incorporate the Buddha as an avatar, while actually the Buddha came up in opposition to Hinduism. I mean, Buddha was condemning Hinduism, the caste system. He was as anti-Hindu as you can be because he was saying this is a rotten kind of system that we are running. And yet, Shankara came and revived the religion and incorporated it. So, this is the history that we need to learn, not a history that says we are good, others are bad. And I think that is the danger in the communalization of the political discourse. But these are issues I have not gone into the book. To the extent that I talk about any of this in the book, I'm only looking at the nature of the elite. And since you talked about the media, I think the media in this country has always been divided into those who are with the government of the day and those who are against. Nothing new in it, except those who were with the government of the day in the past got fewer benefits than those who are with the government of the day today. And in terms of benefits, I can give you examples. I mean, people keep forgetting. India Today started as a magazine to defend the emergency. NDTV, to which channels that came up with the support of Rahul Gandhi and
Rajiv Gandhi.
Sorry, Rajiv Gandhi, and benefited from the patronage of Rajiv Gandhi and the Delhi Darbar, right? So that was a period in which that elite had its own friends and its enemies. Ramnath Goenka of the Indian Express and Yuvana Ramnath Goenka Award, became enemy number one for Indira Gandhi during the emergency. Today you have media which is pro-Modi like Republic TV or people like that, and you have media that is critical. I think the difference is that the price people pay for opposition is more now, and the benefits they get for supporting is more now. So that's a matter of scale, not a matter of actual quality. Having said that, the last word I would say about the nature of the elite and the media is that the media today has become far more of a business and become far more expensive to run media empires. And therefore, those who are not financially well off have a big struggle, on a day-to-day basis to maintain themselves. And I think, therefore, the costs have gone up. What economists or business economists would call entry costs or barriers to entry have gone up. But barriers to entry have gone up in a wide range of businesses and in media as well.
Yeah. So just a final corollary to that. I mean, Prime Minister Modi seems to have attempted, maybe not fully successfully, but certainly attempted to make the mainstream media irrelevant. he doesn't believe in their value as, a vehicle through which to communicate or take questions. And part of the reason why it has been easier for him in the current context, perhaps, than it would have been a decade ago, is the advent of social media. I mean, Prime Minister Modi is somebody who says, I will communicate with my voter, with my audience directly. The media's role as mediator and then bringing the public's questions to the leadership has been eliminated. But is that a viable long-term strategy?
Well, I mean, anything succeeds till it succeeds, and then it stops succeeding, will have to be given up. So he's the kind of chap who will give up something if it doesn't work. And we have seen it in his political career. He has never been restrained in giving up. He has dumped people who he doesn't need anymore. So even the media, if somebody is becoming counterproductive, he will dump them. I don't
Right.
think, because media is incidental. It does not make governments, it does not break governments. I think we should not have an exaggerated sense of our own importance in the media, because at the end of the day, you look at Bengal is a classic example. The entire media was saying Mamata will lose and BJP will win, while the people of Bengal voted for Mamata and against the BJP. So at the end of the day, Indian political, intelligence is way ahead. But I think Modi's strategy is actually counterproductive, and I don't think he should have taken this aggressive stance against the media. There are ways in which to win over support, and in my own view, he could easily have won over support. I don't think he would have found too much of a resistance. But I think by targeting the media, he was making a different point. I don't think the point was about actually targeting the media. I think the point was to make that here are all these chaps who belong to an established elite, the Delhi Darbar. And I have come from outside the Delhi Darbar, and I'm pushing them all off. I quote a very interesting column by Swapan Dasgupta, who many of those who are here today will know as a very prominent journalist. He used to write a regular column in India Today. And he wrote a column when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was Prime Minister, in which he said to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, why are you, going after all these IIC members? Why are you going after this elite that the bar of the Gandhis and the Nehrus? We must create our own elite. In fact, I think that was the title of the column. I quoted it in my book. He says, we must create our own elite. That was Swapan's advice to Vajpayee in 1999 or somewhere around that time. That is precisely what Modi has wanted. I create my own elite, and you can see that. I mean, I don't want to name names. You know them, I know them. In the media, if you look at what is being published in books, etc. So he is now bringing his own people. And when the transition comes, when we enter a post-Modi world, all of them will be either incorporated or dumped, depending on what strategy the successors adopt. Either you incorporate them or dump them. Now, Vajpayee's strategy was to incorporate. Vajpayee completely incorporated the entire media elite that was pro-Indira and pro-Rajiv. You name them and they were all with pro-Vajpayee. Modi has said, no, I don't want these characters. I'm going to create my own. Future Prime Minister may do what Vajpayee did or do what Modi did.
Right. Okay. So I think we have a couple of questions. I'm going to take them from the chat window, and part of it plays into what you just mentioned as well. Just your comments, one on the absence of a press conference in 7 years. I think Lieutenant General Surinder Verma has asked that question or posed that comment, and he wants to know your thoughts about it. So since we're on the media, I'm going to take that one first and ask you to comment. How viable is that as a strategy?
Well, I mean, it's been viable. After all, he's got into his second term without a press conference in his first terms. Politically, it's a viable strategy. It's worked for him. But the point is, it's a silly strategy. In my view, I don't think he would have found addressing a press conference very difficult. I mean, there would have been some difficult questions. He could easily have addressed them. You know, I mentioned this in my earlier book on Manmohan Singh, that when we decided to have Manmohan Singh's first press conference in September 2004, my colleagues in the Prime Minister's office, all the IAS, IFS chaps, were all opposed to it. All of them said, no, it's too early in your tenure. The media will be aggressive. They are all pro-BJP media, pro-Vajpayee media. They will all embarrass you. You will find it difficult. You have to first establish your authority in government, etc. So there was general opposition within the government, within the Prime Minister's office, to a press conference. And I had to convince Dr. Manmohan Singh that you need to establish your own independent personality. Because people see you as Sonia Gandhi's appointee. And unless you go in front of this media, and unless you face every question and convince these Delhi journalists that you are capable of answering questions, you will not be able to establish your personality. We had this discussion, it's there in my book. And finally, the officials, I mean, my colleagues, the NSA, the principal secretary, all said half an hour press conference. And I said to Dr. Singh, half an hour is not going to. Delhi media are the wolves. They're not going to allow you to just speak for half an hour and get away. You keep it open-ended. And actually, I admire Dr. Singh, who not only agreed to keep it open-ended in terms of time, but we kept it open-ended in terms of entry. We had it in Vigyan Bhavan and kept the doors open. Any journalist could walk in as long as he had a visiting card or a accreditation card that said he's a journalist. We had 700 journalists in that auditorium. I don't know if you're there, Maya. At that time, you're probably in the US.
I was in the US, yeah.
Yeah, we had 700 journalists sitting in that auditorium. And the press conference went on for 90 minutes. And Dr. Singh answered.
Well, I mean, yes, and I think to take that forward, even Prime Minister Vajpayee, I mean, I was on my first Prime Ministerial foreign assignment under Prime Minister Vajpayee, and he, there was a media delegation on Air India 1 going to Tehran with him. He took questions, he came out to meet the press, he engaged, even though it was a tricky visit. I mean, Iran was, has always been tricky. But yes, he was open, and of course, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, as you said, was. The fact is that you have somebody here who has made a calculated decision that these people are not important.
Correct.
I think that's the real distinction.
And as I said, I think it's very silly. I mean, no political harm would have been done to him if he had allowed himself to be interviewed. I don't think at the end of the day, Prime Minister like him, given his level of popularity even today, can be done or undone by the media. He'll be undone by his performance. The economy is in shambles. The COVID handling has been terrible. We have now foreign policy challenges. I mean, he'll be undone by his legacy, not by press conferences.
Right. Okay, we have a couple of more questions. One, of course, I think Seema Siddiqui would like to ask her question herself. I'll just put her on. But before that, Rachna ji, you had a question as well, right? About how, I think your question was about what has led to the kind of India we're in today. I mean, why is this new elite finding this India attractive enough to be part of a system? And this goes back to some of what we were discussing about the kind of tensions between the old and new. So what is attractive about the new? And then, of course, I'll ask Seema Siddiqui to ask her question as well. So do you want to quickly take this or take both together?
We'll take both together.
Yeah, okay. Ms Siddiqui, if you could unmute yourself and ask the question. I can't see you on the screen, but
yeah, don't worry about that, Maya. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Baru. Thank you for that session. I have one question and I have a comment. The first one's, when you said that, that the media in earlier times as well, there was a distinct, division there because there was a set of media which was aligned to the establishment, and that's the nature of media, or so I understand. And then you brought it to the current times and you named a media house and spoke about how it's almost a natural built-in thing that happens. Is that a defense of what's happening now, Dr. Baru? Because that's how it came across to me. That's my question. Are we supposed to live with this reality? And the second is a comment, Dr. Baru. You spoke about pluralism of the Hindu tradition and juxtaposed it against the Islamic tradition. I think that was a very specious argument, and it wasn't fair either to the richness of the Hindu tradition or to the Islamic tradition. Thank you.
I don't recall mentioning Islam at all.
You did. You said if you don't belong to the Islamic tradition, you are a kafir, right?
Oh, kafir is the word that is in Urdu, but yeah, unbeliever. I mean, the religions of the book is not just Islam. There's Christianity or Judaism. There is a religion of the book. Hinduism has no book. That's the distinction I was making. I mean, if you don't agree with me, that's fine. It's not a fair or unfair comment. It's a factual comment. There are religions of the book and there are religions without a book. And the ones without a book have been subject to multiple interpretations. And Hinduism has seen so many internal interpretations. I can worship Lord Shiva and say Krishna I don't believe in. Which is possible. I mean, because it's given the plurality. But my book is not about that, and these are about beliefs. And I don't want to get into an argument. I'm just making a factual statement. Even on the media, I'm making a factual statement. What else do you live if not with the reality of the day? You don't live with unreality. This is the reality. There are elements which are for a given regime. And don't look only at Delhi. Look at this country. Look at state by state. In Tamil Nadu, there's pro-DMK, anti-DMK, pro-AIDMK, anti-AIDMK. In Bengal, there's pro-left, anti-left, pro-Mamata, anti-left. And every chief minister is putting journalists they don't like in jail for cartoons. Mamata Banerjee has put journalists in jail for cartoons. So this business of media being with the regime of the day, against the regime of the day is across the country, across countries. In the United States, President Trump says CNN is anti-Trump, Fox News is pro-Trump, NYT is anti-Trump. I mean, so this is the reality. Now, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm telling you it's the reality. This is what you have to live with.
I think if I may, the relationship between the media and political power is also in India a result of the financial stream. Most big media houses, in terms of whether it's newsprint subsidies or government advertising to TV channels, etc. I mean, and political parties have found different elements, certainly of the mass media, as useful tools for political propaganda. So it's an unfortunate truth, but I think it would be we'd be fooling ourselves to say that it isn't the case across the spectrum. Whether it is pro or anti is not really the issue. It's about how money ties you in to making certain decisions, editorial decisions, which you have to reconcile with. And I'm saying this from an editorial perspective in a newsroom. It's unfortunate, and it shouldn't happen. But the decline, the economic decline we've seen since 2008 particularly, has taken resources, corporate resources that were available to the media for advertising, for fundraising, away. And that has been replaced almost entirely by government financing. If the media is going to be dependent on the government for revenue and for resources, it's going to find itself hard pressed to question the government. And I think that's the reason there is this push to drive up subscriptions or donations to independent media houses, which are unfortunately not in a position to pay their journalists money. So, I mean, if journalism is for the public good, then the public needs to step up and pay for it. And I think that's really the big distinction between the way the media has been and the way we would like the media to be today. Sorry, I didn't mean to take on that question on your behalf, but I figured I was in a position to, so I did. Any other questions, comments? Yeah. Rachna ji, would you like to ask your question as well to Dr. Baru? I mean, we sort of
I'm not very clear what her question was.
Yeah.
What I was asking you, Sanjay, is what led to this kind of in India?
Oh, that's a subject for another book. Well, the
Just a
point
couple of points. Just a couple
yeah,
of points. Maybe you can divide it
the
like
nature. I talk about it. The nature of capitalist evolution in this country, the nature of development of capitalism over the last 70 years, the nature of agrarian change. In different parts of India, different social groups have benefited from this change. Some have not benefited from this change, and this is a long-term historical process, right? So to go back to Ram Manohar Lohia, I mean, English-speaking, inherited wealth, upper caste, which was his characterization of the elite in the 1950s. Why has that changed? It has changed because middle caste have been politically and economically empowered across the country. And the point I make in the book, which I said at the very beginning, and I think that's a central argument in my book, is that wealth is required for assimilation of political power, and political power is used for assimilation of wealth. It's the interlocking between wealth and power, which is what we see is the dynamic. So therefore, today, most of your elected representatives are personally wealthy people. There are very few poor MLAs or poor MPs. They all come from very financially good background. And even if they don't, 5 years into a term or a couple of years of ministership, and they become wealthy. And the children certainly become wealthy. So politics is used, or political power is used to accumulate wealth, and wealth has been used to acquire political power. And that has been the history of the last 70 years in this country, with differential levels. In some parts of India, it's more, in some it's less. But otherwise, the process of change is one in which the middle caste have become wealthy. I mean, Mulayam Singh Yadav today is a billionaire. Lalu is a billionaire. His children have flats in Singapore. I mean, you take any Indian politician today, I would take a bet that they have a flat in Singapore or Dubai. I don't think you can think of very few politicians without property outside India. Now that is the nature of transition. Now the second process of transition is that because political power does not require mastery of the English language, control of the English language is important for private sector. Jobs in banks, jobs in companies, jobs in the English-speaking media. But outside of it, language is no longer a barrier to acquiring wealth or power. And therefore, I used to be editor of the Business Standard and the Financial Express. And the only state in which we had an Indian language version of the Business Standard and the Financial Express was Gujarat. We had a Gujarati edition of the FE and Gujarati edition of BS. Why? Because in Gujarat, there are millionaires who don't know English, but play the stock market. They buy, internationally. They're in the gems and jewelry business, buying from Africa, exporting to Europe. And all of them want to know what's happening. So they all read a Gujarati version of the Financial Express and the Business Standard. That will slowly happen across the country, as people who are interested in the stock market don't have to read Economic Times or Business Standard in the English, but can read that Telugu newspaper or Tamil newspaper and still be on top of the world. And that's going to happen.
Okay, all right. I think we're kind of running out of time, but and this is really up to both the author and I think the organizers of this event. I think Lieutenant General Surendra Verma is asking whether he can digress and ask a question about Afghanistan. It's really up to the organizers and the author. I'm perfectly okay with it, but it's your call.
Dr. Baru, Ms Mirchandani, thanks
Yes.
a lot. What an interesting talk. I wish this could have been face to face. And, I assure you, if this had been a physical meeting, there would have been hundreds of our residents and members packed in that small office. Very, very enlightening. So grateful that you took time out to educate us on this. Sorry, I just butted in, but because if you start talking about Taliban, then you will be here till dinner time. Maybe
That's right.
next time we'll talk about Taliban. Thank you so very much on behalf of Gracious Living Foundation, Defence Colony Welfare Association Club, all residents of Defence Colony. Thank you very much and all the very best for the future. And your next book, again, we look forward to both of you here. And hopefully by that time it will be a face-to-face meeting. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you very much for hosting us. Thank you.